we were discussing how to implement a plan to help a parent, and we were speaking about the mom being the CEO of the house, how she can create a policy that would help her child go through routines in the day that are problematic, such as going to bed or getting the homework done or getting up and getting ready for school or whatever the family might have that they're running into problems with the child. So how would you approach this kind of situation?
Yeah, good question. I would approach it always with positivity, meaning nobody enjoys themselves like sounding like a negative broken record and reprimanding or reminding the child for the 100th or 500th time of what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do, what happens if they don't do it, or if they do a negative behavior one more time. So the spirit of positive behavior modification, positive parenting, and positive coaching and leadership, it's all the same really by the end of the day, is always that I want to translate my concerns or my wishes for the child's behavior into positive statements and positive behavioral benchmarks that are easily held accountable and understood by both parties, including the child, of course. And then whenever the child checks those behavioral benchmarks every day, reward that with something that matters to the child, that's enjoyable or meaningful, important to the child. Of course, we're not talking about money or treats, but something that the child maybe in the past even considered an entitlement that is now a privilege or an incentive, a reward that can either be had and maintained every day or not.
Right. So it would be, say, the child really enjoys to have some time on his Xbox.
Right.
Then after accomplishing a set task, the benchmarks,
Yes.
that I brush my teeth, I put my pajamas
Right.
on, I put my dirty clothes in the hamper,
Yes.
I made sure the bathroom was clean,
Right.
and my clothes are set out for the next, whatever the list
Right.
is that the family has put together. And then the child accomplishes that list, and then they're able to have an Xbox. So it's not really a reward punishment system. It's here's something that you're able to do.
Yes.
And I want to essentially honor you, if we want to use kind of Rosenberg's kind of language.
Yes.
And I want to honor you and that you can do
Yes.
this. And I don't want to take that opportunity away from you.
Yes.
Because by your practicing what you're able to do, you will become better at it. And then
Yes.
you will also gain a sense of accomplishment and mastery because now you're doing it repeatedly.
Right.
And then as a side effect, you get to have some time on your Xbox or whatever other currency is valuable to that child because it could change.
Yes, it changes developmentally sometimes, as you know.
Right.
What may be meaningful for a five-year-old may not be the same for a 12-year-old.
And I'd like to add as an aside for what I tell my parents, because the little kids they can't read yet, so I like to use pictures.
Yes.
And I'll tell the parent as part of the fun part of putting this together, the child and the parent can take photographs of them doing the various activities, brushing teeth, putting pajamas on, throwing clothes in a hamper, and you can refresh those photos. So the child always feels there's something new about the experience, so it just doesn't look like the same old. And then the parent can then point to, because as you mentioned, the parent, nobody likes repeating yourself on the same things every day, that as an adult, we just take for granted that people do this, but children don't operate the same way.
Yes.
And we'll get into that in a second.
Yes.
But then the parent can just point to the board, or you can use placards. That's another little lanyards with different things.
Exactly. You redirect the child's attention onto something that you already laid out with them preemptively and agreed to mutually. You just redirect one, say, hey, remember what we agreed on? Remember what you would like to have later on? Yep. Exactly. Yes.
And there's two parts to this, because there's two parties here. There's the parent side, and then there's the child side. And everybody essentially wants to get along.
Yes.
There's nobody's in there at least being malicious for the most part, generally speaking. And so the parent sometimes and the child sometimes, and I'm doing this so I can highlight how they're actually the same person, just at different points along a life arc.
Yes.
And so the mom or the dad might have a focus on, and I need to get through my day.
Yes.
I'm very tired. I have a busy day tomorrow. I have a lot to do tonight. Whatever the litany of possible list of things to do by the end of the day that's occupying the parent's mind. And we know from experiments in the invisible gorilla experiment that when somebody has a focus, that they can become unobservant to very noticeable things.
True.
And so here a parent, or now let's switch over to the child. The child is very excited to play with this toy. They're creating a village. They want to go play outside. So they want to have that same kind of goal orientation, wanting to accomplish something, a focus, just in a play focus, as opposed to a task focus. And so both the parent and the child may not hear one another or use that focus to disregard what the other one's saying. I think that is something that a parent, when they can kind of see that they're actually acting just like their child, but just from a different perspective,
Yes,
it can
true.
kind of make it easier to understand that we need to speak in a language that the child can understand, just
Yes.
as if I'm so focused on something and I'm missing something, then somebody needs to
Right,
point it out
right,
to me
right.
because I'm blind to that.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's really helpful for us all, but for parents to see that by the end of the day, as Marshall Rosenberg in his approach always points out, we all have the same needs. How they're being met is, of course, situationally, circumstantially, temperamentally different, but of course, developmentally different as well. But by the end of the day, the child wants to have freedom and autonomy, the child wants to have playtime and relaxation, or the child wants to have a sense of accomplishment, whatever else those needs might be. And that's why I always say this positive leadership, positive coaching, positive parenting, positive behavior modification, that works for everybody all the time. I mean, most people as adults like to be coached with positivity rather than with pressure or fear or authoritative coaching styles or leadership styles. This really works for everybody across the board.
Yes, that's true, because if punishment cannot be used to drive somebody into action. It might work on the short term, but
Right.
nobody stays in the pocket doing what they're supposed to do
Right.
for fear of punishment.
Yes.
People stay in the pocket because they see that there's a need for themselves and
Right.
possibly for somebody else as well.
Yes.
And so I wanted to discuss a little bit more on what we've spoken about before, which was the schema.
Yes.
And so going back to this mom and looking at a mom who likes to have a more of a friendship kind of relationship with their
Yes.
child,
Yes.
somebody who wants to have the child enjoy their experiences, and then there can be, of course, some softer boundaries with that, and depending on how the child is wired. There's
Yes.
different temperaments.
Yes.
So the child might be a little more aggressive or assertive, and then the child might be more passive. So obviously a passive child would work better in terms of just creating a harmony to the day, as opposed to a more forceful child who then will create problems for the mom. So so speak a little bit of, so the mom can understand that her focus on wanting to keep peace, and then not seeing some of the byproducts of her keeping the peace, which is affecting how the 4-year-old is being engaging in their environment.
Yes.
How would the mom get to that? What are the different schemas that would let the mom come to that place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it goes back to the theory of schema theory, which is basically a very practically applicable fusion, you could say, or integration of what works well in cognitive behavioral approaches and psychodynamic approaches. It takes the best out of them and merges it together somehow. And the approach of schema theory in that regard suggests that we all do one out of three things with certain things that we encountered or learned or liked or didn't like growing up ourselves, in conjunction with some temperamental proclivities, of course. If I'm by nature a conflict avoider because I'm highly agreeable, then I'm, of course, more likely to want to have harmony with my child at all times versus me being a rather rough and gruff, disagreeable, fearless extrovert, So those things matter as well. However, in conjunction with that, it is really one out of three things that we do in any area of life and pertaining to parenting sometimes too. So there are three adjustments that we make consciously or sometimes unconsciously, subconsciously, in response to what was modeled to us or related to us growing up in one way or another, for example, by our parents. One of them is schema maintenance. And that's just a fancy word for, let's just say I grew up in a household where everything was as good as can be. Mom and dad seemed to love each other most of the time and be rather friendly and cooperative and unified with each other. And as a consequence, I will fall into wanting to have my own family and marry and have children too, because that looked pretty natural and pretty good pertaining to what normal or average people do as far as I learned. So there will be schema maintenance. I do the same in one way or another as was modeled to me. Schema compensation would be something different. Schema compensation would be mom and dad seem pretty unhappy. They barely ever talk. They barely ever exchange any verbal gestures or physical gestures of love and affection. They fought a lot. It didn't seem like a lot of fun to be a parent or in a marriage. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. I'm not getting married. I'm not having children. That sounds way too challenging and risky to me. That would be schema avoidance. Schema compensation, for that matter, would be, I did not like that. I will deliberately go to the other side of the extreme. I will pick up my child and kiss it and hug it and tell that I love it. And I will do the same with my spouse all the time because I grew up in a family where that was not modeled and that really, really stunk. So we have 3 different ways of how people cope or pivot and adjust to over time, growing up and as adults pertaining to what was modeled to them. Schema maintenance, I do the same. Schema avoidance, I'm not touching any of that. Not even remotely with the 10-foot pole. I'm not doing any of it. Or schema compensation. I really didn't like that. I'm going to do the opposite.
And understanding that isn't so much as a corrective vehicle, not meaning that you don't see that and then say, oh, I have to change. That's more to understand why you're behaving the way you do when you're under a stressful situation, or why you picked certain events to happen in your life, meaningful events to happen in your life.
If I do recognize that maybe I'm overcompensating for something, that maybe I had zero direction and my parents were not present and involved in my life at all. And everybody was fair game and, in a wider sense, like a completely hands-off, laissez-faire parenting approach. And I didn't think that was good because I got into a lot of risky and dangerous situations as a teenager or a child growing up as a consequence of them not paying attention to me at all, not caring at all, not watching out for me at all. Now I might become a helicopter parent. So yes, you are right, to the extent that everything is within the normal range, so to speak, after I check with myself, I don't necessarily have to change anything. But if I realize that maybe I'm overdoing it a little bit because I got more the other negative side of that continuum on the other pole of that dimension, then maybe I'll be able to see that maybe if I dial it back a little bit, that will be better. The thing that comes to mind is Jordan Peterson in his book 12 Rules for Life has 2 parenting chapters in there. One is, don't let your child do anything that makes you dislike your child. The other one is, do not interfere when you see children skateboarding. And I think that the gray in between those 2 extremes, potentially, if we make those mistakes, maybe sometimes some of us, that is where the better parenting happens, right? So do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. That could be a consequence of a total laissez-faire or helpless parenting style, for lack of better words, that I just either don't think it's healthy for me to reel my child's explorative or maybe testing behaviors in, because I think I would hurt my child by doing that. My child has to be left alone at all times and do whatever it wants. Well, the problem with that can be that my child might get punished by others later, or ostracized by others, or by peers, or punished by teachers, or by the world later when they have roommates and they're going off for college and they haven't learned how to behave in a semi-civilized manner when they're cohabitating with others. I don't want that, because we want to set our children up for success and not to be punished by others or society later when we can't help them anymore. So that will be one potential extreme. The other potential extreme, again, is what mostly people understand as helicopter parent, where I'm constantly running interference and interjecting when there's the slightest potential that my child might injure themselves or scratch themselves. That is the chapter about do not interfere when you see, do not disturb children when you see them skateboarding, because they will hurt themselves. If they're doing that often enough because it's done on concrete or asphalt, that is a given. But you do not necessarily want to interfere, because you do not want to raise a child that doesn't learn from mistakes, within reason, of course, and that doesn't develop their own sense for risk detection of any kind. You might raise a very anxious child that is not ready to take on the world when it's time to leave the nest.
Right. So yeah, I like the schema, because it's a very easy conceptualization of why am I doing what I'm doing?
Exactly. Yeah.
And in the parenting world, when we have children, and this is something that you don't really recognize until you've been a parent for a while, is that by having children, you will re-experience your own childhood. And so that might trigger some of these schema archetypes.
Yes.
Because now you are seeing something that you have either appreciate, so you want more of, maintenance, or your child is behaving in a way that reminds you of how you behaved, and that you're having a contrary reaction to, because now you're at the parenting point, so you approach them differently, and that's where you might helicopter.
Yes.
And then you also have what was the third one again? Avoidance, where you don't want to handle something. But so now you're experiencing these stressful situations because a child is always by your side. They're in your home every day. And at no point in life have you ever had someone tugging on you that often. Yes. So you might have been able to avoid some of these difficult experiences that you had as a child, but now you're face to face with them because your child is behaving in very similar ways that you behaved, or they are triggering emotions that
Right.
your parents exhibited, and now
Right.
you're wondering and
Right.
being confused by
Right.
what's happening.
Or maybe in ways that are highly stressful or embarrassing to me,
Right.
that I was able to avoid and stay away from when it was just me, so to speak, or me and my partner. But now I have a child, and now I'm responsible for that child, and the child might not always behave in ways that make me feel comfortable.
Right. And so that
Yeah.
two ways that this could happen is
Right.
for somebody that was very athletic and now they can't be athletic. And so now they're having
Right.
an issue adapting into their new role as a parent. There's kind of a page turn in the parenting, a new chapter for how
Right.
they have to parent.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and it's not that there's somewhat of a death of ego here, but there's also a new person that's coming about. And so
Yes.
you'll have to re-examine how to distribute your time to make you feel at least whole enough.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So going back I just want to finish with this situation with the 4-year-old is we want to systematize a program that allows the parent to maintain control while recognizing that both the parent and the child are both exhibiting needs, and those needs are really the same. They're just placed at different points on a value sheet, one more important at one age and another more important at the different age. And if we see that both parent and child just want to have their needs met and that there is a way to do this, and returning to the bedtime, the child wants to continue to play, the parent would like to have a quiet evening and not have a crying child as they taken away from their toys. And so the child doesn't want to become upset, but they want to know that they have more time to play. So there would have to be, where you mentioned the Xbox or whatever the currency is to motivate the child in a positive parenting style, to move through the list that's on a sheet, photos or placards or words or whatever works. But it needs to be written down so it's a clear understanding.
Yes.
And with a pre-reading child are not old enough to read,
Right.
they would have to have the pictures. And I just make
Yes.
that distinction so parents
Yes,
make sure
of
that they
course.
include that
Yes.
distinction. And then those that can read, you can do it in a different way.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great.